Hello friends, welcome to Houseplant Tips and Tricks. My name is Nick and today we're going to be transferring some Hoyas to hydroponics. This series is sponsored by repotme.com. Get all of your indoor gardening supplies delivered to your door from one place. Repotme.com has practically anything you need for your orchids, succulents, and houseplants, including handmade potting mixes, planters, fertilizers, and much more. Semi-hydroponics, often abbreviated to semi-hydro and also often referred to as passive hydroponics or passive hydro, is a soil-free method in which you can grow your houseplants. So instead of growing them in soil, you grow them in an inorganic medium. There are plenty of different mediums out there. The one that I'm going to be using today and that I use in my home is Hydroton or LECA Pebbles, LECA standing for lightweight expanded clay aggregate. And you're going to hold that medium inside a reservoir of water, and that is how the plant is going to keep up its nutrients, grow its roots, and take care of itself. You can grow pretty much any plant in semi or passive hydro. If you go on Instagram or TikTok or any social media outlet, you're probably going to see Hoyas most often grown in semi hydro, and this is probably, at least for me, is how you're going to learn about semi or passive hydro in the first place. And it's very enticing because you're going to see other people growing their Hoyas in this method, and it seems like they're growing a lot better than your Hoyas that you are growing in soil or whatever Hoya mix you're using. And speaking from experience, my small amount of experience that I have with this, because I've only been experimenting with this over the past couple of months, I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying that semi-hydroponics works wonders on my Hoyas, at least thus far in my journey. I have a couple examples of Hoyas growing in semi-hydroponics right here. This is the one that has definitely been growing the best for me. This is my Hoya Retusa. A couple months ago, this thing was on the brink of death. I mean, it was holding on for dear life. It's just when I took it out of the soil to transfer it to semi-hydroponics, there were no roots whatsoever. This plant was just decimated of a root system, and I was surprised that it was even alive. But I transferred it over to semi-hydroponics, which of course I'm going to show you how to do today. And you can see now what was once a rootless almost on the brink of death plant now has a really nice root system. You can see the roots starting to peek out from all of the spaces in this planter. This is a net planter or net pot right here. We'll talk about those in a moment. But I'm just really thrilled that this plant not only now has a great root system, but is now growing all over the place on a bunch of different nodes. Like all of these nodes on this vine right here, it's putting off new growth. So much that I just was caught by surprise this past couple of weeks when I realized how much this plant has grown, because like many of my other plants, I really haven't been paying as close attention to it as I should be. And I also have this other Hoya right here that's just getting started growing. You can see there's a new leaf right here. Forget the name of this Hoya on the top of my head. Of course, I'll put the name on screen, but you can also see a really adventurous root system. This one already having a nice root system when I got started with it in semi-hydroponics, but now has really grown even more, and I'm super excited. I can see some new growth tips coming up on this plant, and I think that in a year from now, this plant is going to be triple, if not quadruple the size, especially in comparison to some of my other Hoyas that I am growing in soil. Not that growing Hoyas in soil is a bad thing. I've had plenty of good luck with many of my Hoyas, but if you are struggling with any specific Hoyas, like me, if you've had a Hoya sitting in soil for a couple of years and it's doing absolutely nothing and you can't necessarily figure out what you're doing wrong, maybe consider transferring it to semi-hydro, because firsthand, I've had some really good luck with that, and I'm really excited to see how some of these react. So these are some Hoyas right here that were propagated. All of them are sitting inside some sphagnum moss. One of these is actually a Discidia right here, very closely related to Hoyas, but I figured it could fit in today's video perfectly fine. And you can totally purchase a Hoya from the store in the soil and transfer it to semi-hydroponics perfectly fine. These are just a bunch of Hoyas that need new homes, and I think I would like to grow them in semi-hydroponics because I would like to start them off with success. So what are you going to need to transfer your Hoyas to semi-hydroponics? It's essentially just as easy as repotting your houseplant. You're just going to need some different materials. So of course, we talked about the potting medium. So instead of soil, you're going to need some kind of inorganic lightweight material. So I'm using Hydroton Pebbles today. These are from repotme.com. And of course, I will leave a link below in my description as to where you can purchase these from. And if you purchase them or anything else from repotme.com in the description below through my links, you will give me a small commission with any purchase that you make, so thank you so much. And of course, as always, you can use code NICK to save 10% on any potting mix from repotme.com as well. You're also going to need some net pots. So I also got these from repotme.com. These are insanely inexpensive, cents to just $1, no more than that. There's some really tiny ones, there's some medium-sized ones, and some that are working more towards like what you would put a 6-inch or 5-inch potted plant inside. So we have a lot of size options today. You're of course going to need some plants, and you're going to need a planter. You're going to want to use a cash po or a container. It doesn't have to be a planter, like you're not going to be using a terracotta pot for today's project. I have a cash po right here, for example, which is just a planter that is not draining, doesn't have a drainage hole. I don't know the word I'm looking for, but this is going to hold on to anything that goes inside it. The moisture is going to stay inside. If I filled it up with water, it would stay. It wouldn't seep through like it would if this was an unglazed planter. I also have some more makeshift options. You can really get creative with this, which is the best part about this. I have a glass. This is just a rocks glass that I use when I make cocktails, and I keep a bunch of them in storage just in case they break, so that I can constantly have a full set, because I am that kind of person. And this is just, I don't know what this is. It's just a glass thingy. It kind of looks like recycled glass. I kind of really like it. And I believe all of these will fit these net pots pretty well. Now, you do want to make sure that you do find something that will work well. So you can see this is the exact one that I have the Hoya Retusa in as well. The net pot kind of sits on top, and there's plenty of space below and to the sides of the net pot inside here, because you'll see what's going to go on. We're going to fill this up with water. We're going to fill this up with LECA, as we did with this right here. Full of water, planter is full of LECA pebbles or whatever aggregate you are using. But in order for your plant's roots to adequately explore and grow to its fullest potential, definitely make sure there is enough room around the planter. You don't want it to be too snug inside of whatever canister, container, whatever the word, vessel, that's the word I'm looking for, whatever vessel you need. So here's the smaller size net pot inside this rocks glass right here. You can see plenty of space around the outside, plenty of space below. You don't need too much space. This isn't like you're repotting like a 4-inch plant into a larger planter. You know what I'm saying? This is a little bit different, but you know, you'll get with the program. And this works fine as well. This is not necessarily sitting on top. It's just kind of resting inside, but there's still plenty of space around the sides of the planter. What would be a bad example, I mean, pretty obviously, this is just a no-go, but this right here is really not going to do you any good because there's no space below the net pot for the roots to explore. Although there is roots on space on the side, you know, if there's no other options, I'm sure it would work. It's just not going to allow your plant to grow to its fullest potential. So it seems like we have 3 right here that we're going to do today, because these are just the ones that I have on hand, okay? So before we get started, of course, we're just gonna decide what's going to look best in what. This is my Hoya fungi, I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, right here. I've tried growing this before, not with success. Like, it would put off a couple leaves and then I don't really know what happened. Maybe I just forgot about it. I don't know. It could have been very much my own fault, but since I have struggled with this Hoya before and I just got it recently, it's starting to put off some new growth. You can see these new leaves right here, and it barely has this little growth tip coming in right here. I think this would be a good one to transfer to semi-hydro. I grew it in sphagnum moss in the past, which this is really just a method to propagate your Hoyas, although you can continuously grow Hoyas and many other plants inside sphagnum moss as long as you would like. When I grew it last time, it was inside sphagnum moss, and that's where I found my failure. So I think moving it to semi-hydro is going to be a great first step for growing this Hoya to its maximum. And then maybe for the little small rocks glass, which admittedly, this isn't really my aesthetic. Like, this just rocks glass, like, I mean, I guess it fits my bar aesthetic, but you get what I'm saying. The magic thing about this is that you're basically treating these like cash pos. If I'm just at the thrift store one day and I find like the perfect vessel that looks way more my vibe and it would fit this, like, I might as well just spend a couple of bucks and get it and bring it home, because I can just turn what was just this admittedly kind of boring, not too boring, I'm sure it's kind of exciting to some, but not the most exciting vessel, and change it to something else, and it's not like I'm ripping it out of a planter and planting it in something else and disturbing its roots. I wouldn't be disturbing the plant at all. I would just be kind of upgrading it, if you will. So that's another thing that I really enjoy about growing these in semi-hydro. In fact, this one right here is a little vessel that I made. I don't know what it was supposed to be back when I did pottery. Don't really know what my plan was there. I think it was one of my first little messing around making cylinders, but it works perfectly as my little semi-hydro pot. I think I'd like to get this one. What is this? Hoya Williniana VT152. I think this might work out nicely in the small net pot. Also, the Discidia might be a really good option, or the Hoya Bella. Ooh, the Hoya, crap, we're getting all tangled up in here. The Hoya Bella might be a really great option as well, especially because this thing dries out so fast and the leaves are so thin on this Hoya. And the best part, in my opinion, about semi-hydroponics is that you really don't have to pay that much attention in comparison to the plants that you're physically watering. Of course, you have to make sure that they have water, and hot tip, change the water, preferably a couple times a month, maybe like once every week or every 2 weeks, just because the water is going to lose its nutrients and become stale and gross over time. So just to keep up with the care of the plant, just like you would change out the water in any propagation vessel that you have where you're just simply propagating something, treat it the same way. But yeah, I kind of like the idea of doing the Hoya Bella in the small one. We got the Hoya Fungii in here, and I don't know what we'll put in this one. Once again, not really totally my vibe, just kind of found this as something that would work out for my project today. And will work in the long run. It's just, I'm not really obsessed with the whole stark white planter, but I could, of course, change it over time. But honestly, this Hoya does not look too bad in it. The only thing is I've had some decent luck growing this Hoya already inside the sphagnum moss, so I think I kind of want to keep this one by itself. This is a Hoya Ann, by the way. Really gorgeous. Kind of gives you that like Hoya Callistophylla, Finlaysonii vibe, but it's a little different, a little bit more thin. I kind of like it. And I really do like the way that it looks in this white planter, actually. It really pops. It's just, it really does have this nice piece of new growth coming on, so I think I'm gonna leave this one be. But I also think that this Discidia would also kind of look really nice. It's kind of funky. Like, I don't know what it is about it. I could, like I've said many times, can always change the cache pot or vessel very, very easily to fit my aesthetic. But there's something about just this like round, green, not, I don't want to call it not exciting because it's exciting to me. You guys know I love these kinds of plants, but to the masses, not the most exciting. Just kind of just plain looking plant, plain. That's what I'm looking for. A little plain Jane kind of plant sitting inside this just like white planter that just like really speaks to me and kind of just makes it a little bit more okay. So let's get started with today's project. No more dilly-dallying. I'm really just, I can yammer. You guys know how I am. So let's get started with let's do the Discidia first, because I think this might be the easiest one to do because the soil is the most moist. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by removing the medium, whether it's sphagnum moss or I have a little container below me here. I'm not just dropping it on the floor. We're gonna remove as much sphagnum moss, soil, whatever you're growing your plant inside at the moment before you're transferring it to semi-hydroponics. We're gonna remove as much of this medium as possible. It's really important to do this because we're trying to remove as much of this organic material so that we can grow this successfully inside. The inorganic material is going to make for much less of a gross situation with any like rotting or issues along those lines. Just, of course, to take care to not damage the roots with sphagnum moss. This can be easier said than done sometimes because it really likes to stick onto the roots, but I'm having some decent luck here. Of course, there are some little tiny pieces that might make it into the mix. Not the end of the world, but like I said, the more we can get off, the better. If you do break a couple roots, though, it's really not the end of the world because, as you saw with my Hoya Retusa, that went into semi-hydroponics with pretty much no roots whatsoever. They'll be pretty encouraged to put off some roots once they are settled in the semi-hydroponics. And it's totally different than putting a plant in just like soil without any roots, if that was the case, because it's a little bit more similar to if you were to put a plant cutting inside a vessel of water, which is of course going to just keep it a little bit more happy than if it was just a dry pot of soil, especially in the conditions we have in our home. So here we have our little Discidia. What is this? Discidia tonsuensis. Love the name. We have as much of the soil off as possible, or the sphagnum moss in this case. You can see there's a little bit straggling on. It's not the biggest deal. You just really, oh goodness, really throwing that one everywhere. Just the less, the better. So I have my little container of Hydroton pebbles here, or LECA pebbles. I have rinsed these, so I put them in a strainer. I rinsed them with water, of course, to rinse off all of the dust or dirt that's accumulated on these, like the clay dust. Very similar to like when you rinse rice to get the starches off before you use them, except you're not gonna eat these. So I'm just gonna use this little scoop here. I'm gonna start scooping some of these pebbles into here. Probably just started off with like about a ½ inch to 1 inch of pebbles. There we go. And I'm gonna get my cuttings ready, see which ones are gonna have to go the deepest. So it looks like this one right here is the one that's probably going to be situated the deepest. Find out where the leaves are going to be level. And I think that's good. Now I'm just gonna use my one hand to hold these in place right here. Hopefully you can see. Can't see the monitor as always, but I'm gonna use this hand to scoop a bunch of LECA pebbles. Of course, you can have a helper, assistant helping you out with this. And just start filling up our net pot with the LECA pebbles. Taking care to make sure that all of these roots that we cleaned off are now submerged underneath these pebbles. So use our fingers to just make sure that there isn't too many gaps so that our plant stays in place. I just kind of maneuvered this one in. The small one looks like it kind of got pushed out, so I can just kind of push it in. But as long as the stems are covered, this is a pretty set and forget kind of thing. It's not like soil where it might be falling out. I put some water in here, place it inside, and that's really all we have to do. So you can see this one right here kind of got a little bit loose. We can just kind of push it in. The other two are safe, but we just gotta make sure that these roots are in contact with the LECA. So the water, should have said this already. I only filled up my container enough so that my net pot is probably about 1/3 of the way, like 1/4 to 1/3 of the way submerged. So the LECA pebbles are going to suck up the moisture, even though only a portion of this net pot is submerged under the water. The entirety of these LECA pebbles are going to stay saturated, and that'll keep our plant well watered and maintained, and we don't have to really worry about it. All we really have to do is make sure that the LECA pebbles are in contact with the moisture, or at the bare minimum, the roots. Once the roots start to grow and work their way out of the LECA pebbles, that'll help, but you really do want to keep the LECA pebbles as moist as possible at all times. So let's move on. Let's do this Hoya Bella. Once again, we'll start by just removing the plant from the planter and removing as much of the soil or whatever medium it's been growing inside off of the roots. Wow, for as well as these cuttings have been growing for me, they really have some pretty non-existent root systems. This one better than this little cutting right here, obviously. It's been growing a little bit better, but that just takes me back to the Hoya Retusa right here that had literally no roots. Like when I say no roots, I mean no roots. So this is already in much better condition. Also, I noticed that this has a couple of mealybugs on it. I just kind of cleaned them off with my finger. I'll, go ahead and give this a good wipe down with a little Q-tip with some rubbing alcohol after I'm done filming this video. And I can't speak for sure from experience, but I have heard rumors that growing your houseplants in semi-hydro or passive hydro does help ward off or prevent pests. Don't know how true that is. Don't count on it, but anything that says less pests is always going to be invited in my book. So once again, just going to take a little scoop, start a little bottom layer going inside the net pot here, just as we would fill up just our planters when we are working with soil. Just a little bit of the way, given a little bit of a base for our plants to then be placed on top of. Once again, making sure that our roots are going to be underneath the LECA pebbles and that our leaves are going to be above the LECA pebbles. The leaf part isn't really a big deal. Just for me, it's aesthetically, but of course, the way that these plants have been growing, the roots are all underneath where the leaves have been growing, and the leaves have been at the base of the soil. So just trying to replicate that look. Just kind of digging for some small LECA pebbles since this container is pretty small. The big ones are going to take up a lot of room, and just to fill in some of those gaps, I'm gonna throw in some teeny tiny ones. Once again, just kind of pushing down to make sure that everything is set just like we would do when we're potting soil around the perimeter, as I always do, to make sure that there are no gaps or air bubbles. And I'm gonna go fill this up with water and then we'll see how it's looking. Okay, I really should have done this one first because you can see visually now that it's not an opaque container how much water I am putting inside. So just about a third, a quarter-ish of the net pot is covered up by water. Get that water off the bottom to try to not damage my table any more than we're going to in today's project. But that's about it. Very set and forget, especially with these clear containers. Like, I really like that about the Hoya Retusa one that it's been in, because I can see visually when it's time to fill up with more water, or if the water is kind of starting to get a little gross and I know it's been a little too long and it's time to make some changes in there. But yeah, really kind of fun. I don't really mind the way it looks. I know I was like, not really my aesthetic, but yeah. And you can see there's these roots that are from the plant already, just the tiny ones that were on there are at the side of the planter. So over the next couple of weeks, I'm sure those are gonna start to actually grow now that it's going to be in a much better condition than it was, and start to explore, and those roots will start to work their way all around just like they were with the Hoya Retusa. So last but not least, let's get this Hoya fungii started. Wish I could get a little bit more of the sphagnum off this, but it's as if the roots are like embedded in it. It's kind of weird. Anyway, this one's gonna be a little funky because this leaf is underneath where the roots are, so I'm gonna try to get it on like an angle so that the leaf is still poking out like this. And those other roots are still submerged. So I think I might actually start this one out with the plant already inside, because I really like the way that it's situated just like this. So I'm gonna leave it be, hold it in place, and then I'm just gonna start filling it up with the LECA Pebbles. All right, that's looking good. That was a lot easier than the last one. So just kind of dumped it right in there. There's a little bit of root, if you can kind of see, I don't know how well, you can see a little brown bit, which is the sphagnum moss still like attached to the root there. I'm just gonna take this extra large little LECA pebble and just place it on top of there to encourage that to stay moist. We'll see, like I said, this is very set and forget. I'm not gonna be kind of moving it around. I'll just be going up to it and refilling it with water, or once or twice a month, taking it over to the sink to dump it out twice. Maybe 3 times, don't do once. I know I just said that, but on my worst months, maybe just once. Once again, I'm gonna go fill this up with water and we'll see how it's looking. And here we are. You can see the water just up once again, quarter roughly, a little bit more than that, not quite a third above the bottom of our net pot. Our LECA Pebbles are gonna stay saturated, and oh, look at our little collection that we have going of little semi-hydroponic Hoyas. I'm really excited to see how these ones adapt, particularly the fungii, because I just really would like some good success growing this Hoya. I tried it, like I said once before, not good success, so I'm very hopeful that growing it under this method, I'm gonna have some more of this Hoya Retusa-like success. Like, this appendage right here is just going wild. I'm obsessed, and we're also having some new growth from inside, so I'm really thrilled about that. And this guy just getting started as well. Also very excited to put this guy in the front because, you know, he's a little small boy. And before we finish off this whole demonstration, I feel like it also is kind of important to mention how to fertilize these. I mentioned watering, very easy to upkeep. Fertilizing is also very easy as well. You can just use an Orchid spray fertilizer. I have one right here from repotme.com, the Feed Me Orchid Mist. And instead of putting anything in the water, which could cause just like some weird algae growth and stuff like that, fun, weird things and science experiments, you just go ahead and spray the leaves. Probably shouldn't be doing this on my wood table, but just give them each like a little spray. Particularly in the growing season, you're gonna be doing this maybe twice a month to upkeep with how they're usually growing. We're going into the winter months, or the not growing season, the sleepy season. So yeah, this isn't really that necessary, but you know, just to keep them going, a little food never hurt. But now that we're really starting to get close to winter and it's getting really dark early, at least where I am, I'm sure these are gonna be just taking a little nap very soon and really slow down their growth. But hey, if I can get a little something something before then, I will take it. So that's going to do it for today's video, transferring Hoyas and a Discidia into semi-hydroponics or passive hydroponics. Thank you so much to repotme.com for sponsoring today's video and this series. All of the products that I use from repotme.com will be linked in the description below. As I mentioned, if you click through those links, I will get a commission for any purchase that you make, and you can use code NICK to save 10% on any potting mix that you get from repotme.com. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you don't already, you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at phillyfoliage. Subscribe to my Patreon if you would like to support me even more, and I will see you guys in my next video. Have a great time.